You know, there's this ancient prophecy that describes a king of absolute will, a ruler who would, get this, exalt himself above every god and act with just this terrifying arrogance. Today, we're going to explore how the final verses of Daniel 11 might just be a startlingly precise blueprint for the life and, really, the dramatic downfall of one of history's most notorious tyrants, Antiochus IV Epiphanes.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break it down. We're going to follow this prophecy almost like a 5-act play. We'll kick things off with the king's defining arrogance, then see how he literally builds a cult of raw power, and from there, we'll follow him on his last blazing campaign that leads right up to the shocking events that trigger his sudden and very lonely end.
All right, first up, the prophecy zooms right in on the character of this king. And what it shows us is a man who is driven by an ego that is just off the charts, and this deep-seated contempt for any authority, whether it's divine or traditional, other than his own.
Verse 36 paints this incredibly vivid picture, right? A king who just does whatever he wants, succeeding purely because he wills it to be so. Now, when historians go looking for a match, one name just immediately jumps off the page: Antiochus IV Epiphanes. This was a ruler who was legendary for his extravagance and his totally unpredictable, self-serving actions.
And listen, this wasn't just empty talk. The historical record, and I'm talking even from non-Jewish sources, it shows Antiochus plundering temple after temple. It literally didn't matter whose god it belonged to. His actions screamed that he truly genuinely believed he was above them all.
And verse 37 just keeps building this profile. It says he rejects the God of his fathers. I mean, he's actively making laws against his own country's religion. And then you get this really interesting phrase, no regard for the desire of women. A lot of scholars see this fulfilled in his absolute lack of compassion, specifically in his orders to slaughter mothers right along with their children. It shows this profound disregard for the most fundamental bonds of family and life itself.
So if he's rejecting all the traditional gods, what in the world does he worship instead? Well, the prophecy tells us he replaced them all with a single, brutal idea that centered on one thing and one thing only: raw military force.
Verse 38 says he honored the god of forces. Now, this isn't some forgotten deity we have to look up. It's the personification of military might itself. For Antiochus, you see, ultimate power wasn't somewhere up in the heavens. It was at the sharp end of his sword. That was his real religion.
And verse 39 basically lays out his entire playbook, and it flows directly from this worship of power. It's a simple 3-step plan. First, you use your military might to conquer all the strongholds. Second, you reward anyone who acknowledges your new system. And third, you divide up the land you just conquered, in this case Judea, and you hand it out to your loyal followers to lock in your control. Simple, brutal, effective.
So now we get to see this ideology of force completely unleashed. The prophecy shifts gears and takes us to Antiochus's final blazing military campaign, a time of just intense and widespread conflict.
Verses 40 to 43, they describe this final chaotic period. As trouble is brewing out in the east, Antiochus unleashes his armies like a whirlwind. I mean, they just sweep into Judea, which the text calls the glorious land, and they push all the way into Egypt, seizing control of its legendary treasures of gold and silver.
But verse 41 adds this really fascinating detail. Some of the neighboring territories, Edom, Moab, and Ammon, they were spared. But here's the kicker. It's not because they fought him off. It's because they did the exact opposite. They sided with him. They actually joined his campaign against the Jews.
And this is where the prophecy lines up with history with just stunning accuracy. The Greek historian Polybius, he confirms it. He wrote that Antiochus plundered Egypt's wealth by cynically, completely breaking the very treaty he just made with its young king.
But right when his power seems absolute, when his conquest seemed totally unstoppable, the prophecy pivots. It shows us that instability that always lies just beneath the surface of unchecked ambition.
So let's just pause for a second and think about this. From his perspective, Antiochus is at the absolute peak of his power. He has crushed his rivals, he's plundered entire nations, and now he is fabulously wealthy from his Egyptian conquest. The man seems completely unstoppable.
And it's at this exact moment of triumph that verse 44 predicts a sudden reversal. Tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him, And this lines up perfectly with historical accounts, which tell us that right at that moment, rebellions broke out among the Parthians to the east and the Armenians to the north, forcing him to react with, well, furious anger.
And all of this leads us to the prophecy's dramatic final act, the sudden, humiliating, and just utterly lonely end of this seemingly all-powerful king. Verse 45 describes his final act of pure ego. He plants the tabernacles of his palace in the glorious holy mountain. Now, this isn't just him setting up camp. This is a symbolic act of ultimate dominance. He's setting up his military headquarters and declaring his absolute authority right in the heart of the land he desecrated.
And then comes the final, chilling prediction. At the absolute peak of his power, camped in the very land he violated, the prophecy declares his end will be swift and solitary. Quote, "He shall come to his end, and none shall help him."
And what does history record? Well, Antiochus didn't die in some blaze of glory on the battlefield. No, he was struck down by a gruesome, incurable disease. Accounts say he fell from his chariot with so much force that every single limb was racked with pain. The man who exalted himself above the heavens was carried away in a litter, a humiliating spectacle where no army, no ally, and certainly no god of forces could do a thing to help him.
So the story of Antiochus Epiphanes, seemingly foretold with such incredible precision, it serves as this stark historical echo of this ancient text, and it leaves us with a powerful question that honestly still resonates today. What really are the ultimate limits of human ambition? And for those who place their faith entirely in their own power, does there always come a moment when they finally reach for help and find no one there?